The moment my son hurled my suitcase onto the porch and turned the key in the lock, I understood. Years of silence lay ahead. At the time it sounded like fate mocking me. I stood on their doorstep in my best Sunday dress, kept my back straight the way my mother taught me, while my own blood treated me like a piece of trash left over from yesterday's garbage. I didn't make a scene. I just breathed and watched as someone else's certainty shut the door in my face. Back then, none of them could have imagined that this yesterday's junk would one day become a life other people would look at with respect. If you can hear me, tell me in the comments where you're from and subscribe. Every time a woman my age gets back up after a fall, somewhere another woman finds it a little easier to do the same. My name is Margarita Nikolaevna. Everyone calls me Rita. I am now 72 years old, and I know this for certain. There is nothing sweeter than a quiet, honest victory, the kind that doesn't require you to humiliate anyone afterward. It's enough to live well, with your own hands. It was October 15th, 2012, when everything split in two, loud and shameful, like a plate crashing in a kitchen. I had been living with my son and his wife for 3 months after my husband died. I took the grandkids to preschool, folded their little socks in pairs, made soup, and knitted scarves. I thought, family is exactly for this, to support one another when someone's hands are shaking from exhaustion. My pension was meager, but money wasn't the point. I kept telling myself, we'll get through the winter, and then I'll sort out what's next. That morning my son said, "Mom, we need to talk," and I heard a chill in his voice I had never heard before. My daughter-in-law stood beside him, arms crossed, with that, "I've decided" look that always made something shrivel up inside me. "What happened?" I asked, setting their favorite cup down on the shiny countertop, the one I'd been quietly supporting with part of my pension all year so their mortgage would be easier to carry. "This arrangement no longer works for us," she said calmly. "You do everything your own way. The children no longer understand who's in charge." I looked at my son, hoping he'd wave away the nonsense, make a joke, tell me not to listen. He lowered his eyes and pretended to examine the window. "Where am I supposed to go?" I asked quietly, surprised at how small my voice sounded. "That's not our problem," she shrugged, lightly, as if we were talking about an extra frying pan and not a person. "You're an adult woman. You'll figure it out." 20 minutes later my life fit into 2 suitcases and a taped-up cardboard box. 60 years, in photos, postcards, brooches, dish towels, reduced to whatever I could carry in my hands. The rest, as my daughter-in-law cheerfully announced, they would donate to charity, as if doing me a favor. My son, lugging things, mumbled, "Don't make it harder," and for a second I saw the little boy who used to cry when I left for night shifts. But she came to the doorway and put her hand on his elbow, and his face went hard again. A taxi pulled up just as the first cold drops pricked the porch. I got in without looking back. Not because I was strong, because there was nowhere left to break. I had just over 26,000 rubles in my wallet. No job. No place of my own. But I lacked one thing, a habit of giving up. For 6 weeks my home was a roadside motel with an ironic name, Sunset. 1,500 a night for a room that smelled of bleach and other people's troubles, a rattling air conditioner, and thin towels. But the door locked, the roof didn't leak, and no one would throw me out onto the steps, already a luxury. The desk clerk, an older man named Pyotr Petrovich, started putting aside an extra towel for me by the second week and whispering, "Hold on. You're not like everyone else." I would nod, words always stuck in my throat those days. The worst part was the first mornings. You wake up on a narrow, squeaky bed, spend a few seconds not understanding where you are, and then it hits you. Not children's laughter from the kitchen, not the refrigerator door closing, but the air conditioner's wheeze, like the last breath of some old animal. You hear the neighbor cough through the wall, someone step out for a smoke on the shared balcony, and you tell yourself, "Rita, get up. Enough crying. You have a kettle, means you can live." I had always survived by working. When my son was little and we were alone, I took on 3 jobs: shop during the day, office cleaning at night, ironing on weekends. We survived then. We'd survive now. I pulled my woolen scarf tighter, heat was rationed at the motel, and stepped out to look for a way. First stop, the library. It was warm, free, quiet, with internet. And bulletin boards. Every morning I walked there to save on the bus, sat at the same table by a window where the light was soft and people spoke in low voices. At 60, you're not greeted with open arms. But I wasn't there for embraces. I needed a chance, not pity. I copied job listings by hand, called, "Listen to the polite, we'll call you back." I rewrote my skills into new lines: bookkeeping, neatness, invoices, stamina, responsibility. Employment office, applications, interviews. After the third, "We'll think about it," something iced over inside me. But my feet kept carrying me back to the library anyway. In the evenings I returned to the motel, heated water on the hot plate, and counted the money left to make it to the end of the month. A week of porridge, bread, tea, and a cheap packet of cottage cheese. "That's enough, Rita, don't whine." On the nightstand I placed 2 photos. In one, my son is small, in a striped winter hat, his little fingers grip my finger like an anchor. In the other, my husband and I are together, tired, but with smiles in the corners of our eyes. I didn't cry. Not because I didn't want to, because crying eats your strength, and I needed mine in the morning. 2 weeks later my days fell into a rhythm. Library in the morning, calls and applications by day, hot water in a basin at night so my legs wouldn't cramp, and the notebook where I carefully recorded anything useful. Still, sometimes the thought snuck up on me, what if that's it? What if it's already too late? On such evenings I would step onto the motel balcony, look at the highway where the rare trucks vanished into darkness, and say aloud, to hear myself, "Too late starts when they carry you. So long as you're on your feet, it isn't." On the 4th week, I got my first real responses. Not many, 1 out of 5, but enough to feel the breath return. I botched one interview, not because I didn't know what to do, but because I smiled too hard when I should have kept quiet and shown how I count. I arrived 3 minutes late to another, missed the bus, the next one 40 minutes off. I walked in shoes that pinched, furious at myself and at the shoes. I promised myself I wouldn't miss the third. The third try happened in a garden center on the edge of town. A modest sign, a woman my age at the door, hands in soil, short nails, a direct, steady gaze. Svetlana. We sat in her cramped back office surrounded by clay pots, old catalogs, and a battered desk. I put my work record book and notes on the table. For the first time in weeks I could breathe easier. The place smelled of earth, not of paper. "Experience with accounting?" she asked, looking me straight in the eyes, not over my head. "Yes," I said, gripping the corner of my notebook page a little tighter. 20 years of keeping books in a contractor's office with my husband. Contracts, retainers, taxes, late payments. On the windowsill, a tired spider plant had been turned toward the light. I had done it earlier with a gentle quickness, almost without thinking, and Svetlana noticed. She gave a short, amused snort. "The pay is small," she said quietly. "Part-time. Paperwork, storeroom, a bit of computer. Will you manage?" "I will," I said. And suddenly it felt easy, as if someone had slipped a pillow under my back. I remember my first workday by the smells. Soil, damp cardboard, a thread of iodine from green cuttings, and the sound of quiet, people busy with useful things. In the storeroom I found pure chaos. Folders labeled 3 different ways, dates out of order, purchase prices wandering, sale discounts on signs not matching the books, supplier contracts untouched since those old rolling news banners about the 2008 crisis. I stacked the papers, took a pencil, and began to untangle it, calmly, without lecture, like a housewife clearing the top shelf because no one else will. "How's it going?" Svetlana looked in a couple hours later. "Started simple," I said. "I'll make a clean table, actual purchases, markup, seasonal prices, we should have a winter schedule. And delivery, you're paying per drop, but you could negotiate fixed logistics, cheaper." She nodded, short and to the point. No, wow, and I loved that. It meant she spoke my language. The walk back to the motel was cold and long, but I walked it like a person who had something under their feet again. A day not wasted. Work in my hands, and that means the morning tea would be hot not just from the kettle, but from the thought that someone needed me. In my room, I kindled the little burner, arranged my pen and notebook on the table like a soldier laying out a pack to find everything in the morning, and counted my bills. There was still a long way to the end of the month, but for the first time in weeks I didn't feel strangled by the emptiness. I received my first paycheck a week later, $12,000. Not a lot to live on, but to me it was fresh air after a cellar. I bought a small coffee maker so I wouldn't wrestle with a seive on a hot plate, a cheap pot of violets for the windowsill, and pinned our 2 photos to the wall with a thumbtack, closer to the bed. The room was still not mine, but such small things helped it tolerate me, and me it. Work pulled me into its steady rhythm, an hour at the library to send letters, daytime at the garden center checking consignment notes and reconciling, evenings with the tables, and quiet joy when a line of logic slips neatly into the place where earlier there was noise. Svetlana didn't flatter me. She brought another stack of papers and asked, "Can you do these today?" I said, "I can," and did. That autumn, on the open ground outside the garden center, a hill of tired shrubs began to grow, pot after pot with fallen leaves, long roots peeking like old fingers. The forklift hauled leftovers toward the dumpster. "To make space," the boys said, "for wreaths and bulbs." "And all that goes in the trash?" I asked, as if merely noting the write-off. "Where else?" The storeman waved his hand. "Who will buy these dead ones?" I didn't argue. I've learned not to argue immediately. Look first, think, then ask the right person. That evening I couldn't sleep. I kept seeing the spider plant come alive from a simple turn toward the window, recalling pelargoniums that revive when not drowned. The boys had called them dead ones, but inside me something clicked. Maybe not dead. Maybe asleep. Maybe they can be brought back like a debt, patiently, with the right hands. In the morning, adding numbers, I realized I was counting not only rubles, but pots. How many pieces? What sizes? Which kinds? What does that write-off translate to in cash? "Look closer, Rita," my inner voice whispered. "There's more than paperwork here. There's opportunity." Later I stopped Svetlana as she passed. "What if we didn't throw them out?" "How?" she asked, squinting a little, interested in spite of herself. I opened my notebook on a clean page. "Give me the sleeping ones for winter. I'll bring them back. Cut, replant, set the light and water, and hold their rhythm. In spring we'll put them back on the shelf with a modest discount. We'll split whatever they bring fairly. You get free space and a chance to recover some money. I get a way to earn without asking for handouts. Your risk, 0. It's all right off anyway." Svetlana listened. She nodded once, then again. "Just don't turn my storeroom into a hospital," she said. "Take them to your place." "My place," I repeated, and understood that my place could no longer be a bleach-smelling motel with a rattling fan. If I was serious, I needed a little space of my own. In a week, I found a tiny studio above a pizzeria. Low ceiling, 2 steps of kitchen, 1 of hallway, a large window, a murmuring radiator. The landlord looked me up and down and sighed, but he rented it. I sat on the only chair and realized, this is my meter by meter. From here no one will throw me out with a phrase, "Figure it out yourself." In November, the storeman and I made 3 trips in a gazelle. I noted down each sleeping plant on the consignment notes. We lined them according to type, heads turned this way and that, roots like hands reaching. In 2 weeks the studio turned into a greenhouse. The windowsill was an army of pots. A basin of clay pebbles sat on a stool. Cuttings stood in glass jars. I wrote on little tags in my careful hand, hydrangea, keep dry, pelargonium, bright light, no heat, do not overwater. I read articles in the library about wintering plants, printed out advice, and at home applied it calmly, no fuss. Above all, quiet, I told myself. Plants dislike panic. December stretched out gray and long. It felt as if the plants were silent, and the apartment too. But I heard a change in the stillness. The earth stopped smelling like a damp closet. A faint green note appeared, the kind you smell when you open a summer window after rain. In January, the first buds on the pelargoniums swelled. By February, little green points were everywhere, and I laughed for the first time in months. Not loudly, so as not to startle anyone, quietly, but from the heart. "What kind of jungle is this?" asked Genya from the pizzeria one day as he helped me carry a bag of soil. "Customers are asking if they can buy something from you." "In spring, Genya," I said. "Spring will show." In March, I assembled my first batch. I wiped leaves, refreshed the soil, boxed each plant, tied them with twine so they wouldn't sway, and took them to the garden center. Svetlana came out to the yard, looked, raised an eyebrow. "Margarita Nikolaevna," They look new. I told you, I smiled. Not dead, sleeping. We agreed quickly. We'll put them on the shelf with a careful discount so they move without sitting. People gravitated to them without knowing their backstory, because they looked alive. Svetlana settled up by day's end. 30,000 in hand. More than my monthly pay then. But more important than money was the feeling that I could do something again. Not paper stamping, not endurance, but taking what had been written off and bringing it back to life. I walked home lighter than I'd been in years. Bought apples that actually smelled like apples and a new little coffee pot. Mornings should start with dignity, even if you have one chair and a stool under a basin. In my notebook I wrote, Experiment number 1, successful. Then, errors, overwatered 2 pots, lost one to mold. Next time, better drainage, water less, more even light. And beside it, not loud, but firm, this is mine. The next day, Svetlana brought me a list. You can have the rest of the season's write-offs if you can handle it. Same terms. I can, I said. But that night, locking the studio among pots and notebooks, I caught myself thinking, I can do it. But where will I store more? In the window glass, my small, overfilled room reflected back at me. For the first time I could see clearly. I needed more light and more space. Spring flew. Days at the garden center, evenings in the greenhouse, nights with the notebook. Joy shifted quickly to arithmetic. Too little space, more plants coming, and the thought of all those sleepers thrown away pained me. Genya helped. Rita, I'll put up 2 shelves by the stairwell if you need, but we both knew it was temporary. By May, my studio fit like a child's hat on a grown head. I made a choice and moved. I found a 1-bedroom with a balcony a block away. Mornings, the courtyard smelled like bread from the bakery. Honest radiators. A balcony where I could hang shelves and dry pots. The owner frowned at my trays, but he agreed after I showed him saucers and covers. I keep it clean. I will be responsible for any drips. My neighbor, Aunt Lida, clucked her tongue. Residential building, not a greenhouse, but when the white phalaenopsis I gave her bloomed, her tone changed. Do you have basil? Like the one my daughter has in Italy, it should smell. We'll do basil, I laughed. Just don't drown it. It's proud. By June, word of mouth did what advertising couldn't. That Rita at Svetlana's brings back what was thrown away, people at the market said. One more garden warehouse called. Then another. Quiet, without fanfare. Will you take ours? What's your split? I took them, pruned, drained, coaxed each one from not now to alive, just a little patience. By autumn I made more on sleepers than on my bookkeeping. I was honest with Svetlana. Keep me 2 days a week on the books. The rest, I'm with the plants. She nodded, pleased I think. She seemed to enjoy watching order born out of chaos, in papers or in green. Life simplified. Morning coffee and checking moisture. An hour at the library to read up on wintering. Daytime deliveries. Evenings with the plants. Nights with the notebook. In it, 2 columns, what worked and where to look next. In the first, timers for lamps, new drainage mixes, rules like better under than over. In the second, a thought about a proper space. Not windows and hallway corners, but rows with aisles and water, a place to work like a real small business, not a hobby. There were problems. The landlord sighed heavily when I carried in another tray. Genya grumbled when passers-by gathered by my wall to ask if I sold that little bush. And inside me one string vibrated. The balcony was no longer enough. I didn't want to trade out of a hallway. I wanted to work properly, with documents, sanitation, proper water and light. Svetlana said it straight. You need your own space. A storeroom, a hangar, a greenhouse. And you need to think not just about saving plants, but about counting, selling, scaling. You are not asking for charity. You are creating value. I nodded and wrote. That night, listening to water drip into a towel under a tray, I asked myself, can you, Rita, not just hold a watering can, but explain to other people that this isn't a pastime, it's a women-led business after 60 that pays its way? The next morning, I signed up for a free consult at My Business, the small business center. The appointment card lay by my husband's photo. It said, Elena Radionova, Office 214. In the hallway, it smelled like offices and coffee. Behind the door, someone flipped a folder and clicked a pen. "Sit down and tell it like it is," Elena said when I came in. "What do you do? How do you earn? Where are the bottlenecks?" I spoke plainly. "In the fall I take the write-offs. Sort, treat. Winter, prune, drain, set the light and water, hold the routine. In spring, return to the shelf with a small discount. We split the money by agreement. My accounts are neat, all in the notebook." Elena listened, asked sharp questions. "What percentage revives? How many units went back in rubles last season? Where do you store? How much space for 1,000 pots? Who works if you get sick?" I stuck to facts. More than half revive. Last season at Partners we returned goods worth enough to make an economist warm by his calculator. Space is tight. I need more. I'll hire helpers and train them. I'm not afraid of mistakes. I'll register as sole proprietor. "This is not a hobby," Elena said, tapping a clean sheet. "This is a business. We'll formalize sole proprietorship or LLC, activity codes, supplier contracts, storage regime, tech cards for revival, logistic plans. You qualify for a subsidized small business loan. You have revenue, a clear model, a social benefit, the second life of plants. We'll gather documents. It's not about age. It's about order." We wrote a plan. I titled it Phoenix, a second life for plants. Something inside me eased. We broke the work into steps: intake, sorting, pruning, repotting, light and water schedule, tracking, return, and retail if needed. Elena added contingencies: if winter is long, if electricity goes up, if a supplier delays, if you are tired. "Plan B is mandatory," she said. Weeks passed. Days with plants, nights with spreadsheets. Elena polished the plan, added citations, demanded sources. We talked to the bank like pessimists. That way we'll be pleasantly surprised. The application grew a spine: business plan, graphs, photos, partner letters, draft contracts, a seasonality calendar, even a sketch of shelving for the space so I wouldn't measure an empty hanger with a tape while crying. The bank meeting was dry. A young manager scanned our documents. "Why do you think the market won't eat you before you grow?" he asked. I laid down 3 photos: one sad shrub in October, the same with buds in January, the same lush in March. "Because this is not a promise," I said. "I already do it." Last spring, from one location we returned merchandise worth over 1,000,000 rubles back to the shelf. With 450 square meters and 2 assistants, we'll double that. The rest is not if, it's when. He looked at Elena. She didn't fawn, didn't argue. She just sat beside me, quiet and solid. I think that convinced him more than words. A week later, a letter arrived. Approved, a subsidized development loan, not a fortune, but exactly enough to rent space, buy shelving and lamps, set up water and drainage, and keep the operation running until spring. I leaned against the wall by the mailboxes and thought of the motel named Sunset. Well, I told myself, we've walked far from that door. We found a space on the edge of town, an old brick warehouse with high ceilings, a roll-up door for the gazelle, water and electricity already connected. Genya helped carry the first shelves. 2 young guys built tables. I laid out zones: intake, pruning, repotting, quarantine, ready. Hung a chalkboard for dates, batches, temperature, humidity. I kept a paper journal by habit. I hired 2 helpers, a neat, quiet woman from next door with careful hands, and a reserved young man with bright eyes. I showed them how I work: better underwater than over water, right over fast. Silence helps. We signed contracts with partners, Svetlana, then 2 warehouses, then small shops around the region, then a call from a neighboring area: "Will you take our leftovers too?" We wrote everything down like grown-ups: responsibilities, amounts, timetables. Each signature clicked into place like a cogwheel. In the evenings, alone, I listened to the faint hum of the lamps, checked hoses, corrected schedules. This quiet wasn't empty. It was purposeful, like a classroom after school when you stay to erase the board and the sky turns violet in the windows. By winter we took in our first big shipment of sleepers. A loader whistled. "Where will you put all of this?" "In their places," I answered. By evening, every pot stood where it belonged: with a tag and a line in the journal. My phone buzzed non-stop, one warehouse confirming a schedule, another clarifying terms. I only wanted to get home, put on the kettle, and sit for a minute in clean silence. One night, a call came from a regional home improvement chain. "We got your contact from 2 garden centers," said a calm, businesslike voice. "We'd like to discuss a partnership." Elena and I went to the meeting together. 2 men and a woman in tailored jackets sat on the other side of a glossy table. "Tell us how you do it," one of them said, "and what it gives us in money and in reputation." I didn't talk about my love for plants. I showed photos, printed rack shots with small Second Life tags, and explained simply, "We take what would be thrown away in October and November. We sort, treat, hold a steady regimen. In spring we return real merchandise. Give it shelf space and a fair price. It moves. No magic. Just process, step by step." Elena added numbers. Turnover speed up. Return to sale at solid percentages. Margin positive. "Let's do a pilot," said the manager in charge of sustainability at the end. 2 hypermarkets. Your regimen, our sites. We compare over 6 months, return share, speed, customer feedback. If we're aligned, we scale. The pilot had snags. One site security slowed our gazelle, no extra release coupon. Another manager tried to place revived plants in the darkest aisle because it's empty. I explained, shade and draft would undo a week's labor. But people learn. Some grumble, some listen. In a month, neat placards appeared, Second Life. Smart and eco-friendly. Customers started pausing, considering, picking. An older man at the register told me, "These look just like the ones I have at home. They survived the winter. They'll be fine." By April, the numbers settled into the tables. Elena brought them like a hostess brings hot food. Slowly, with a bit of pride. Turnover improved, return share hit respectable marks. The pilot paid for itself and then some. The chain shook hands. Honest work. Let's expand. Expansion isn't just new sites. It's order. We registered Phoenix, a Second Life for plants, as a trademark. I finished the tech cards. We made simple training videos, hands showing how to cut, how to set drainage, how to knot metal. We looked for operators, not wizards, but patient people. We're not a balloon and ribbon franchise. We're licensing, procedures, supply, quality control, fair percentages. In 2 seasons, we had 15 operators working in 5 regions. Not giant, but sturdy, like a knitted shawl that warms and holds. Life moved with the business. I moved to a 2-room apartment near a park. We held a small women's circle on Thursdays. Me, Elena, 2 friends. We talked about books, grandkids' exams, and the deep joy of having a thing that's yours after 60. A small business for women, a personal project that makes you stand tall. I started a new notebook not for plants, but for people. When to stay silent, when to insist gently, when to praise, when to pour tea and change the subject. By the 5th spring, Phoenix stood on its own legs better than I had ever dared to dream listening to that motel air conditioner. We had multi-region contracts. Operators sent their reports without reminders. The chain extended and expanded our pilot. And still, there's always a next step. Elena said, sipping tea on my windowsill, "You could use a house. Space. Soil of your own. A room where you write plans not on an edge of a table." I joked, "A house is responsibility." But inside, a string hummed. A week later, a realtor I knew called, "A rare thing. An old manor in Pine Heights is up for sale. The owners are moving, want to close quickly. Come see it." I hung up and looked at the drying trays and the tangled lavender bunch above the radiator. The next day, she and I stood at the gate. The house rose on a hill, light stucco, tall windows, a broad terrace, a glass winter garden to one side. Inside, crisp air smelled like wood and paint. Marble hall, oak staircase, a library with shelves to the ceiling, a kitchen where you cook without bumping your elbows. I stood in the master bedroom by the window and looked over the town. There was the block where I once lived above a pizzeria, there, where my son lives now. Far and close at once. I thought, maybe this is how life is measured, steps up, not to look down, but to finally breathe without shame. We didn't drag our feet. The sellers wanted speed. We named our number, lower than asking but with a guaranteed 2-week close, bank letter in hand. They agreed. I got the keys 2 weeks later. While assemblers and carriers wandered through the rooms, I stepped out onto the back terrace and sat. Air smelled like grass and fresh earth. No frenzy. No anger. Just a large, quiet space. It was almost funny inside. My old furniture looked like a schoolgirl in her mother's coat in those rooms. But that's a problem of a different kind, one you can happily solve. That evening, Elena texted, "You're a big one, Rita." Saturday, champagne. I wrote back, "We'll drink to quiet without humiliation." She sent a little smile and a full stop, our small way of saying, "We understand." That night, the house creaked in its own way. I walked the hallway barefoot, touched the walls, peered into the winter garden where the first table stood, checked the windows, put on the kettle. The water sounded different in these new walls. "You're home," I thought. Morning in the glass room was bright. Light fell in broad bars across benches and propagation lamps. Outside, the garden paths gleamed with dew, tall pines framed the view. I found the cups I had unpacked and brewed coffee. The doorbell rang and the sound ran through the house like a spoon against fine glass. I went to the entry and turned on the video intercom. The picture came up like a film frame. 4 people. My son, in light chinos and a polite polo, the one he uses to cover up an anxious hurry. His wife, poised and confident, that practiced smile she uses to open other people's doors. A step behind, 2 teenagers, grown so tall in these years that at first I didn't recognize them. The girl's face, like my boy when he used to wear that striped hat. The boy's glance, my glance, quiet, stubborn. They stood on my porch and smiled uncertainly like people who have already counted someone else's rooms in their heads and then remember they should say hello first. I pressed talk, not open. "Good morning. What brings you here?" I asked evenly. Wind hissed softly in the little speaker. Someone cleared a throat. "Mom, congratulations," my son said. His voice sounded older than his shirt. "We saw the title transfer in the paper. We wanted to see you. To talk." "Congratulations accepted," I said. "As for the talk, come in. But note, my house is quiet. I don't tolerate arguments or complaints." I set them by the window. Light is honest there. It makes it hard to pretend. I set out tea. I did not offer sugar. Conversations with sugar rarely go where they should. "Mom, we were wrong," my son began. "Back then we were—" "Don't hurry to justify yourself," I said. "Say directly, why are you here now?" My daughter-in-law gave her smooth business smile. "We are family. Your house has more than enough space. We have difficulties. We thought, for a while. Until, for a while," I repeated. "You already had, for a while. 6 weeks in a motel. That was, for a while. Now it's different. Now I have boundaries." The children exchanged glances. The girl bit her lip. The boy looked down. I turned to them gently. "Do you remember me?" "No," the girl said honestly. "Dad said you went away on your own." "Your dad wasn't telling the truth," I said without malice. "They put me out with 2 suitcases. I lived in a motel for 6 weeks, then above a pizzeria. I worked. I took what others threw away and brought it to life. Now you two will listen," I added, looking at the adults. "I didn't raise my voice. You told me you lost your job. You were fired 6 months before, for falsified reports. I have the paper. Not because I snooped. An acquaintance saw your name accidentally at the employment office. You," I turned to my daughter-in-law, opened 3 credit cards. "You pledged the house a second time. There's a pre-foreclosure notice. You have nowhere to live. Is that true?" The pause stretched. "True," my son nodded. "And one more thing," I continued, putting my phone on the table. 6 months after you put me out, you came to me one night. Drunk and honest. You wrote a letter. Here's its photo. You asked for forgiveness, asked me to come back, and to not tell her because she would leave. You chose her calm over my truth. And you were silent for 7 years. That, too, is true." My son covered his face with his hands. My daughter-in-law sat straighter, but her eyes flickered. The girl couldn't hold it in. "Dad, what is this?" "This is what happens when adults hide behind children," I answered. "And now the adults will have to step out from behind your backs." We sat in silence, the clock on the mantel ticking like in a clinic waiting room, no thirst for talk or tea. Then I placed my cup down and said what needed to be said. "You two are not moving into my house. Not for a while, not for now. This is my home. It stands on my feet. But the door for the children is open, always. If you want to build a relationship with me, we start with truth. You will tell the children everything, not how you remember it, but how it was. After that, put your money in order. Without Mom, lend us for a week. Show me account statements without red lines. Show me a job without, it didn't work out. Talk to a psychologist if you wish. I would recommend it. And one more thing, learn to knock at doors and into other people's lives. Without an invitation, you won't come in here. This house has an alarm, and I won't hesitate to push the button." "That's cruel." "We are family," my daughter-in-law blurted out. "Cruel is putting a mother out into the rain," I said. "Boundaries are health." "Mom, please," my son whispered. "We'll leave please for later," I said. "Now is the time to act." The children asked to stay, and I let them. We leafed through photo albums for 2 hours. The boy in the striped hat, a woman with tired eyes, a noisy holiday in the old kitchen, the notes stuck on our old refrigerator with magnets. The children laughed, then fell quiet when they realized how many years had been stolen from them by someone else's decisions. "Saturdays, tea at my place," I said. "During the week, messages. Not like homework, but the real kind." I walked them back to the gate in the evening. The adults stood off to the side, looking suddenly chilled. "We will come again," my son said. "Come back when you are ready not to take, but to answer," I replied. "And do not forget to knock." That night I called Elena. She listened, then said, "This isn't a victory. This is order." "Yes," I agreed. "And I need it more than victories." The winter garden lamps glowed steady. I sat by the glass and watched the paths glisten under the pines and thought, of all the things I have raised these years, the heaviest wasn't shelves or plants, it was my own spine. I had to straighten it and hold it, calmly, without malice, but firmly. A week later the children came alone, with a pie they apologized for oversugaring. They told me about school and plans, about how shame and relief are often found side by side when truth is spoken aloud. I listened and felt quiet inside, the kind of quiet you feel in a greenhouse just before watering, everything in its place, all waiting their turn, no one tugging you by the sleeve. The adults wrote to me a month later. We cleared the debts. We found jobs. We saw a counselor. We told the children everything. We asked to meet. "Not now," I answered. "Give it time to take hold. A year. Not out of spite. Out of care for myself. That's how I live. Mornings, Phoenix, reports, teaching people not to hurry and not to overwater. Afternoons, dedicated work. Evenings, tea with the grandchildren or quiet. The house is settling in not with wealth, but with meaning. There is always bread and salt in the kitchen. A long table in the winter garden for spring trials. In my office, a notebook where I write not only about plants, but about what I have understood. Family relationships, personal boundaries, financial independence, motivation for women after 60. The moral is simple, and it lives in deeds, not on greeting cards. Family is not a pass into someone else's property, but responsibility for your own. Help is not an obligation but a choice. Boundaries are not cruelty, they are a way to protect dignity. And the best revenge is to live so that you don't want to take revenge, because you have something honest and quiet of your own. If they ever knock again, not demanding, but asking, I will consider it. I have time now to think. And I have a house from which no one will ever put me out into the rain again. Thank you for staying with me to the end. Tell me in the comments how old you are and where you're from. We want to know who is listening. Click like and subscribe. There are more true stories ahead about self-employment, women's entrepreneurship, small business, and the second life of sleeping dreams.